I know the following. Vladimir Putin doesn't give a damn about anything Keith Kellogg's going to say because none of it matters. The Russians have made it clear. This war ends the way Russia wants it to end. That's it. Nothing else matters. And anybody tries to do, I mean, the things that we're seeing, I mean, we see, no NATO. Well, gee, thanks. Russia already said that. So who is the United States to give Russia that? Russia went to war because of that. The reason why there's a war is because NATO wanted to get in Ukraine and Russia went, no. So for the United States to go, okay, no NATO, Russia, no, we're already there. There won't be a NATO. It's not your decision to make. We made that decision already, non-negotiable. The territories, Crimea and Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk. It's Russia. Russia already made that decision. The war won't end until all of those territories belong to that, and the Ukrainians are out of Kursk. Okay? It's non-negotiable. You're not going to freeze the thing. A ceasefire. There won't be a ceasefire. The only time the shooting stops is when a peace treaty is signed. There won't be a ceasefire before that, because otherwise Russia has yielded all the advantages it's obtained by carrying out this very expensive war of attrition. They now have total control over the scope and scale and the pace and the direction of the battlefield. And it's all moving in Russia's direction. Why would Russia ever reverse that? And there won't be a single foreign soldier on Ukrainian soil unless they speak Russian and they wear the Russian uniform. There's not going to be British peacekeepers, French peacekeepers. There won't be any peacekeepers. Peacekeeping, by the way, only happens when both sides agree to this. Right now, Ukraine is laboring under the false promise of American support and America will back them up. But when it becomes apparent that it's all over, as Budanov said, Ukraine ceases to exist. To give you an example of where the Russians are on this one, the head of the Russian intelligence service, an old friend of Vladimir Putin's, is holding meetings and within Russia, and is talking about holding meetings with regional neighbors to carve up Ukraine in a post-conflict reality. I think the Hungarians are very interested in the Hungarian population of Carpathia. I think the Slovakians are interested in the Ruthenians, and I think the Romanians have an interest in that too. So I think you have all these neighbors of Ukraine that are more than happy, I think, at the end to carve Ukraine up. And this is what Trump has to understand. That's the reality. That's the outcome. Trump's not going to stop that because this war ends when Russia wants it to end. And one of the ways it's going to end is with a total political collapse of the Ukrainian government. And then Russia steps in with its own version of it. They already have the guy they want to be the interim president. They already have interim parliamentarians. This government that's there right now isn't going to exist. It's going to be eliminated. Zelensky can ask Trump all he wants. Zelensky can demand of Trump. Zelensky can beg to Trump. Russia doesn't care. Donald Trump literally doesn't have a say in any of this. Trump believes he does. He's trying to make himself to be the big player. The biggest player in this is Vladimir Putin. That's the big dog. Trump is a big dog trying to get into the big dog's neighborhood. The big dog's like, I don't want to fight with you, but but you got to get rid of the barking chihuahuas, and this is my neighborhood. But Trump can't come in and say, now you go back to your kennel and you go back to your kennel and it all belongs to me. Who the hell is Donald Trump to come walking in and say, we get all the rare earth metals in Ukraine? Well, the Russians are like, well, you're going to have to kick us off that land because we own it, pal. We're going to own it all, and you're going to get none of it. None of it. This is the stupidity of the Trump approach. But it's so stupid that you have to take a step back and go, he knows it's stupid. Donald Trump's not an idiot. This is, again, I think, part of the opening audacious gambit. But the difference is with the Middle East, he has multiple opportunities. This is where Donald Trump could actually play a role and go into Russia and say, hey, we'll give you everything you want, but we need assurances that the post-conflict, that the territories that are there are going to be part of a greater Ukraine. We'll let you have a say on how a greater Ukraine looks, but you need to commit to a treaty that has a clause that says no referendums. That there won't be a pathway to referendum, a pathway to independence. That way, post-war Ukraine has Odessa, has access to the Black Sea, has economic viability. They have Dnipropetrovsk, they have Kharkov, they have the minerals that are there. There's a potential for a post-war economy that's beyond agronic. That's what Trump could be doing if he was smart. But instead, and maybe that's the direction he's going. But to get there, I think it's the same thing with anything. You've got to get everybody to recognize that the path that people were headed on, because the concept of a ceasefire and foreign peacekeepers, that predates Donald Trump. That's a concept that was being bandied around under Biden. Trump can't just ignore all that and jump over here, because people will say, oh, no, you've caved into Putin, you've caved into Russia. So he goes in with this, and it becomes totally impractical, but it begins a process of negotiation where the Russian reality is gradually able to be absorbed. And in the end, you get some sort of compromise. And I do think the one area that the Russians would be willing to compromise on is a guarantee, because I talked to the former prime minister of Ukraine who has fled to Russia as part of the Ukrainian government in exile. And he said, a Ukraine without Odessa, a Ukraine without Kharkov is not a Ukraine. It's not economically viable. And so it's in the interest of Ukraine to have both those territories stay in Ukraine, and it's in the interest of Russia to have them stay in there, because long term, saying no to NATO is one thing. And the other thing Trump is saying, guaranteed EU membership. No, that's not going to happen. Ukraine is going to become part of the union. That right now there's, you have Belarus and Russia have an economic political union. Ukraine's going to become a part of that, a three-way union. That's the future of Ukraine. A three-way union that ties it to Russia, because Russia's never again going to allow Ukraine to be used by the West as a tool to undermine Russia. That will never again happen. It's not just about kicking NATO out. It's about ensuring Ukraine stays in the Russian orbit forever in perpetuity. That's it. And that's a reality that the United States has to accept and NATO has to accept. And if they don't want to, then this war will go on until Russia dictates that outcome. But Ukraine will not be an independent state leaning towards the West ever again. Russia can't afford that. They're not going to fight this war 30 years from now, which would be what happens if you allow Ukraine to be polluted by the West, to become a member of the European Union. First of all, the European Union is not going to be here in 30 years anyway, so it doesn't matter. But no, Russia is going to insist that Ukraine is part of an economic and political union. The Ukrainian military is going to be eliminated. That's demilitarization. It's not just no NATO. It's the fundamental change. And I think you're also going to look at Russia. Everybody's like, well, Russia's going to take Odessa and Kharkov. No, they don't. There's no articulation of that from Vladimir Putin, and Russia's not making any of the military steps that would be necessary to seize Odessa and Kharkov. What Russia is going to do is create the political conditions under which Russia will be able to assert its authority in a post-conflict manner in these areas by overseeing the governance of those regions, and then create, through economic investment, etc., the conditions that are favorable for a referendum 3 to 5 years down the road, where those populations vote to join Russia and secede from Ukraine. That's how Russia gets Odessa. That's how Russia gets Kharkov. And maybe how they get Dnipropetrovsk and Mykolaiv as well. And that way, Odessa and Kharkov, the economic potential benefits not just Ukraine, but also the Union as a whole. And that's how Russia controls those areas. And that's how the people who live there, who are speaking Russian and ethnic Russians, feel safe and secure in there, because that'll be built into the Constitution. And because it's a union, there's open borders. They can travel freely into Novorossiya. They can travel freely into Russia. And that's the direction we're heading. They're going to carve out, they're going to jettison Western Ukraine, though. I don't think the Russians want anything to do with Lvov and that, because it's full of poisonous people. And that's Poland's problem. Poland's going to have to deal with those. But I think one of the things that Trump does is he puts forward, remember, I think we have to treat the Kellogg peace plan with the same skepticism that we treated Trump's Gaza peace plan. Absurd, unrealistic, is never going to happen. But it's the opening gambit. Remember, Trump is putting something out for not just the Russians, but the Ukrainians and NATO. He has to play those too. And I'm pretty sure at the end, the Russians are going to get what they want, because that's the only way this war ends. If Trump wants the war to end this year, then he has to fast track getting Russia to where it wants to be. If Trump causes a problem, Russia will get there on Russia's timetable. It'll cost the Ukrainians a lot more lives. It'll cost us, more money, but it isn't going to alter the outcome. And all it does is further entrench Russia against the United States. I think Donald Trump understands that, his ultimate goal is to have stability in the European theater of operations. You're not going to get stability by forcing Russia to continue this war to crush NATO, crush Europe, and embarrass the United States. The best way to avoid embarrassment is don't put yourself in embarrassing situations. And right now, trying to stand up to Russia on Ukraine is an embarrassment. The United States has no leverage over Russia. Trump and Kellogg talk about bringing the oil down to $45 a barrel. Russia can laugh that off. You know who can't? The United States. Go to West Texas. Ask the wildcatters who've been pouring all their life savings and everything, borrowing money from the bank to drill the new oil, drill baby drill. Those new wells break even point $66. Right now they're making money because it's 70. Drop it down to 45 and watch all of those those wells go out of business, and watch all the wildcat companies go bankrupt, and watch the American economy collapse, and watch oil production in the United States drop by 30% in 2 years. That's the reality. Keith Kellogg, it doesn't matter what he thinks or what he says or does. It's irrelevant. It's a game being played for domestic consumptions. The Russians aren't listening. They don't care. And I wish Keith Kellogg would start listening to the Russians, because that's the reality. So the idea of unilaterally imposing a peacekeeping solution on Russians that don't want it just means you'll have dead peacekeepers, because they won't be peacekeepers. They'll be war fighters fighting on behalf of Ukraine. This is the reality. Russia has prepared a plan, an economic plan for sustainment of their defense industry and the economic investments into this war that goes through the end of 27 into 2028. Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, says that Ukraine ceases to exist this summer. You tell me which model is the more sustainable model. Germany right now is waking up. Denmark's waking up to the fact that they need cheap Russian gas. America blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, and Europe's finally waking up saying, we got to fix it. Why? If you're so against Russian energy, if you're passing these sanctions, why are you fixing a pipeline that connects you to Russian gas? Because they know what the reality is, that Europe is collapsing and will continue to collapse until they get access to cheap energy. And they are also preparing for a future when there can be normalized relations. And when that happens, when Russian gas flows into Germany, the Baltics are going to be isolated because no one's coming to their assistance. And Poland's going to be stuck. And you think the Poles, given a choice of, tying in economically with Germany and France and the rest, or, hanging out with the yapping Chihuahuas? I have a Chihuahua who I love to death, and so I don't like to make fun of them, or Pomeranians, but these are little dogs who are meaningless. The Baltic states, they're useless. And I think the Baltics are going to find themselves in a position where they're going to have to learn to live with Russia. Let them play their stupid games right now. You think Russia's losing the sleep because, Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia decide they're going to cut themselves off from Russian electricity? Russia could give a damn. Do it. Don't come complaining. Don't come knocking, begging down the road when everything you think is going to happen, the European Union and NATO, when it's all gone, it all falls apart, and you'll be all alone in our neighborhood. And you're going to look to us and say, can you help us? And like Finland's going to find itself very lonely. The Swedes always had a good Nordic relationship, but the Finns are going to find themselves very lonely with that big border with Russia that they suddenly tried to militarize, and they bankrupted themselves, and NATO is not going to exist in 5 years, and Finland's going to be sitting there going, what the hell did we do? And Russia's going to be like, you caused this problem, not us. And then Russia's going to dictate specific terms of how to re-engage. The United States was in the business of rebuilding Europe, the Marshall Plan and all that. Who paid for the reconstruction of the Soviet Union? You know the answer. The Soviet Union did. They did what needed to be done. Who's going to pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine? Russia and Ukraine will. They don't need any help. These are people with a history of doing this very thing. They're not pathetic. They're not like the West. They're not helpless. When the Ukrainians get rid of the banderists, get rid of the nationalists, and go back to their roots, you'll see that they will dig in and they will do what needs to be done to rebuild. And they'll do that with the assistance of the Russians and the assistance of BRICS, of Eurasia. That's the direction Russia has gone. Russia's not going to turn to the West for help. Russia just fought a war to keep the West the hell out of Ukraine. So Russia's not going to turn around and go, hey, let's bring in USAID. Yeah, George Soros, come on in, pal. Help us rebuild Ukraine, you bastard. No, Russia's not looking for help or a handout. Russia doesn't need it. Russia doesn't want it. Ukraine doesn't need it. Ukraine doesn't want it. They'll rebuild Ukraine the way it needs to be rebuilt. And this is actually a good opportunity for Russia and Ukraine to redefine an economic. Remember, Ukraine became independent at the most inconvenient time because every aspect of Ukraine's economy was geared towards supporting the Soviet Union, not supporting Ukraine. And so, by rebuilding Ukraine, you're going to be redefining these economic relations on a more modern, healthier basis. And again, you have the Belarusian model. Belarusian defense industry is totally integrated in with the Russian defense industry. And Ukraine has a very viable defense industry. The irony is that Dnipropetrovsk Dnipro factory could end up building a Russian missiles, the missile that hit it. So who knows what the future holds? But no, the West isn't going to have a say in this. Donald Trump has no interest. The United States will have no interest in Ukraine's mineral wealth. Russia isn't going to let it happen. And Russia gets to dictate the outcome because they won. So he knows that Israel is the problem. He knows that Benjamin Netanyahu is the problem also. That's why he reposted Jeffrey Sachs's condemnation of Benjamin Netanyahu. Why would Trump do that if he was, the compliant puppet of Netanyahu? Because he's not. He doesn't like Netanyahu. He recognizes that Netanyahu is the problem, not the solution. He knows Netanyahu has lied to him. And if you read into the post that he put out with Jeffrey Sachs, he knows that Netanyahu has set America up to get involved in Israel's wars, to have America do the fighting for Israel. So Trump appears to be all-knowing about this, aware of this. What he does, I don't know. And that's the way Trump apparently wants it. But I don't think he likes Netanyahu. I think he despises Netanyahu. Otherwise, why did he do what he did? Netanyahu is white-knuckling it through that presentation. You saw his hands on the podium. He was sitting there going, what the hell am I listening to? What is he saying? Why is he? It was humiliating for the Israeli prime minister. And that seems to be Trump's thing. Bring him in, pomp and circumstances, and then set him straight in front of the world. Why did Trump do that? Only Donald Trump knows. I don't think Israel was ever serious about this. This is one of the reasons why Donald Trump did what he did, to create a new paradigm. Because Israel was never serious about this ceasefire. And Donald Trump believes that if you just continue to do business as normal, the ceasefire will be violated and Israel will be back at war in Gaza and America will be stuck in the middle. So we'll see what happens. I think Trump is putting pressure on Israel to stay the course. Whether it's successful or not, we'll see. Israel has a long history of undermining American foreign policy prerogatives because Israel only cares about Israel. Israel's not a friend of America. Israel is not a friend of America. Never has been. Never will be. Israel cares only about Israel. Ask the survivors of the USS Liberty. Ask the FBI today, when they're not harassing Americans. They should be protecting us from the espionage of Israel. Who's the greatest intelligence threat to the United States of America? It's not Russia. It's not China. Who is the most aggressive collector of intelligence against the American target? Israel. Israel is not our friend at all, not even close. Israel uses America like a parasite uses its host. That's it. So, and I think Trump has broken the code. Trump understands this. He understands that about Netanyahu. But, in parasitical relationships that are advanced, you can't just strip the parasite away or kill yourself. The parasite has invaded the host so much that you can't remove the parasite without killing yourself. So you have to gradually wean yourself from them. Maybe that's the direction he's going. I don't know. There are enough of us who remember what Israel is and what Israel has always been. And it's not a friend of America. The United States doesn't own Gaza. We're not putting troops on the ground. We're not driving 1.9 million people out. It isn't going to happen. None of that's going to happen. That's just Trump's opening game. And again, you have to rely on people who assess what others do for a living. Look for patterns of life, patterns of behavior. And Trump's past patterns of behavior, I think, are a good judge of what he's up to. Go back and look at North Korea and what he did with North Korea in his first term. Fire and fury, threatening nuclear war. Kim Jong-un, if you sneeze, if you dare do this, I'm going to blow you off the face of your boom. 6 months later, he's meeting with the guy. 3 meetings, including one at the demilitarized zone, crossing over into North Korea to shake the guy's hand. I don't think anybody who heard Donald Trump speak at the United Nations said, that's how this ends. And I can almost guarantee you that how this ends isn't going to be anything like the statement made by Donald Trump in the White House. It's just an opening gambit. It's the way Trump does business. And so he had to do something different. What he put on the table was completely different. It's unlike any proposal that's ever been put out there before. But it's not a solution. It's a proposal, meaning that he has swept the board clear. Now he's put his proposition on the table. And I think to get a seat at the table, you have to say more than no. I think to get a seat at the table, you have to say no, but here's an alternative. Here's a counter offer. And I think that's what's going on here. I think Trump is playing, a game that's so unlike normal statesmanship, so unlike, normal diplomacy, that people are just totally, been out of whack over this. I don't take what he said literally. I don't read into anything he said, because none of that's going to happen. Literally, none of it can happen. I view this as an opening, proposition in order to get people to come in and say, okay, how do we solve this? You see, because you can't rely on the past tools. The past tools didn't work. Anybody who wants to sit here and make a case that Trump should have just continued doing what everybody's been doing for 40 or 50 years, then you're saying you really don't care about the Palestinian people. I know people are going to say, well, Trump doesn't. He didn't, he's not taking anything, people. Stop. He's not taking anything. Donald Trump hates Benjamin Netanyahu. Doesn't like him. There's no agreement between the two. It's all a game. But one of the main reasons is that Netanyahu's trying to get America into wars that Trump says we're not going to fight anymore. So yeah, there's this. That's a major roadblock between the two. And again, Trump doesn't deal with these problems the way that most diplomats or statesmen would. He's very direct and he's very blunt, and he doesn't give a damn about protocol. We saw that he made a statement in front of the Israeli prime minister, two major commitments to policy directions that weren't pre-cleared with the Israelis. Thrown out, and Netanyahu was just sitting there looking confused. And the other thing you have to remember is that Trump knows that Netanyahu conspired against him. Especially in this election, that the Israelis were pushing really hard for Kamala Harris. They were pushing for Joe Biden before that. Trump is a very petty man on that count, so he holds grudges. So this isn't just about Trump's vision of the world. This is personal. And Donald Trump, is a very his thin skin. He holds a grudge. So we'll see what happens. But they basically proved in Donald Trump's mind what everybody knew, that none of them have a solution. It's amazing. Arabia can sit there and say, we won't normalize relations with Israel until which time there's a Palestinian state and its capital is in East Jerusalem. How do we get from here to there, pal? They don't have a clue because they don't want it to happen. Saudi Arabia doesn't want Palestine. Jordan doesn't want Palestine. Egypt doesn't want Palestine. None of the Gulf Arab states want Palestine. If they did want it, we'd have a Palestine today. They don't want it. They're just playing lip service because the genocide that Israel carried out was so outrageous that the people of the streets can't be ignored. So the governments are placating them with throwaway statements. But Donald Trump's called out their hypocrisy because none of them have a solution. All they can do is say no. None of them can say, no, why don't we try this instead? None of them have a solution. I've said Iran's direction is not towards conflict with Israel. Iran doesn't want a conflict with Israel. Iran is strategically oriented in different directions. And this was even under Raisi. But then Raisi died and was replaced by Pez, who openly campaigned on wanting to have better relations with the West. And I said, that's the reality. All these people are saying Iran's going to blow Israel off the face of the map. True promise. I said, no. I mean, they could. They have the military capacity to do so. That's not the direction the Iranian leadership wants to take Iran. Iran is a member of BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union. Iran is looking for stability, not instability, and war never brings stability. It only brings instability. Iran's looking for economic, engagement, not military engagement. And so Iran has a completely different approach to problem solving that is conducive to what Donald Trump is seeking to do, which is a better deal. Remember, he got out of the JCPOA not to bomb Iran. That's why Israel wanted him to get out of the JCPOA. Netanyahu's always been a bombing. Why did Trump pick those Jeffrey Sachs clips? What did Sachs say? Netanyahu had got us involved in all of the wars in the Middle East. That means Trump is saying, yeah, that's what Netanyahu. He knows the game Netanyahu is playing. Netanyahu is one of the reasons why Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, based upon the Israeli intelligence that the Mossad got raiding that little document place. The wonderful little story they told about capturing documents that when they published them, it appeared that these are the same documents that they released back in 2004. Got to do a better job, Israel. You can't release them twice, but they did, which means the whole thing is a lie, a setup. Trump knows this, and he knows that Israel's trying to get him involved in a war. He knows what Netanyahu's agenda is. So once again, he's stuck at the Netanyahu. Now, this isn't a surprise. Trump has been campaigning on this constantly. Back in September, he talked about, the fact that he wants to lift sanctions on Iran, that he doesn't want regime change, that but he is worried about Iran's nuclear program. I think basically comes down to the fact that the United States has compromised the leadership of all the Arab world. And Egypt, why doesn't, what does Sisi believe in? Billions of dollars of American aid flowing to Egypt. When Trump shut down foreign aid, Egypt was the exception. Why? Because the Egyptian aid is tied to Israeli aid by law. And if you cut the Egyptian aid, you got to cut the Israeli aid. And Egypt's not going to do anything to lose that money. That's how this corrupt man Sisi stays in power. American money buying off people. The king of Jordan, we know he's not Jordanian. He's a Hashemite, the Saudi. His family was imposed on the people of Jordan, in the aftermath of World War I. In the same way that a Hashemite was imposed on Syria for a small period of time and imposed on Iraq. In Iraq, it went bad for them. They ended up dragging his body through the streets. That's the fate of the king of Jordan if he's not careful. And the way he stays in power is to keep his Western masters happy. And the way you keep them happy is you go along with the Israeli. There won't be a Palestine. They don't want a Palestine because a Palestine, it's not about what a Palestine would represent to them in terms of a threat. It's because it upsets a balance in the Middle East that is favorable to the economic and political elites of Israel's neighbors. If you redefine relationships in the Middle East, then these power structures get redefined, and the people that are in power may not be in power anymore, and people that are in power always want to stay in power. So no, I think the concept of Palestine is threatening because it threatens to bring an end to this period of instability that the United States, Great Britain, and others have used to impose their will on regional leaders.